Hello everyone, and welcome to Whispering Woods. I'm here to help you unwind tonight to slow your breathing, clear your thoughts, and drift into calm. Find a comfortable place, let the world outside fade, and just listen. Before we begin, if stories like this help you find a little peace at the end of the day, feel free to like this video and subscribe to Whispering Woods. It lets these quiet tales keep finding the ones who need them. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? The evening air carries whispers of lavender and old roses, their petals soft as silk against the gathering dusk. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimes the hour, its bronze voice rolling across rooftops and gardens, marking time as it has for centuries. Your shoulders release their burden, breath flowing like water over smooth stones. The last rays of sunlight filter through curtains, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. And in this gentle twilight, stories begin to unfold like forgotten letters found in antique books. Time moves differently here, slower, kinder, as if the world itself is settling into sleep. The scent of jasmine drifts on the evening breeze, carrying with it the promise of rest and the gentle embrace of dreams yet to come. There is a garden at the end of Millfield Lane where no one ever goes anymore. Not because it's forbidden, exactly, but because people have simply forgotten it exists. The iron gate stands slightly ajar, green with age and patience, waiting for someone curious enough to push it open. Ivy winds through the bars in intricate patterns, and beyond the gate, a narrow path disappears between towering hollyhocks and wild jasmine that perfumes the air with memory. The lane itself is quiet at this hour, lined with Victorian houses whose windows glow warmly in the gathering dusk. Children's bicycles rest against garden walls, and cats stretch lazily on sun-warmed stone steps. There's a peaceful rhythm to this neighborhood, a sense that time moves more gently here than in the rushing world beyond. The street lamps are just beginning to flicker on, casting pools of golden light that seem to invite evening wanderers to slow their pace and notice the beauty that surrounds them. I discovered this place on a Tuesday evening in late September, when the light had that particular quality it only holds in autumn, golden, and nostalgic, making everything look like a faded photograph. I had been walking without purpose, letting my feet choose the way, when I noticed the gate. Something about it called to me. Perhaps the way the setting sun caught the brass nameplate, worn smooth but still legible. Thorn Garden, Est, 1847. The numbers seemed to shimmer in the dying light, and as I stood there reading them, I became aware of a sound I hadn't noticed before, the faint but unmistakable ticking of clocks. Not harsh or urgent, but gentle and rhythmic, like a heartbeat heard from a great distance. The sound seemed to come from beyond the gate, woven into the very air of the hidden space beyond. The path beyond the gate wound through what had once been carefully tended flower beds. Now they grew wild and free, but beautifully so, as if nature had taken over the gardener's work with gentle hands. Roses climbed untamed up ancient arbors, their blooms fuller and more fragrant than any I'd ever known. The varieties were old ones, with names like Poetry, Maiden's Blush, and Menam, Hardy, Celestial, and Alba Maxima. Their petals lay scattered on the path like confetti from some long-ago celebration, soft beneath my feet and releasing fresh perfume with every step. Foxgloves stood like sentinels among the undergrowth, their purple bells swaying in the evening breeze. And everywhere, the sound of water moving over stone suggested hidden streams and forgotten fountains. Ancient fruit trees stretched their gnarled branches overhead, heavy with apples and pears that glowed like lanterns in the fading light. The air was alive with the gentle hum of bees making their final rounds of the day, their work unhurried and purposeful. As I walked deeper into the garden, the sounds of the world outside began to fade. No traffic, no voices, just the soft symphony of leaves rustling and water flowing. The path twisted and turned, leading me past a crumbling sundial covered in climbing roses, around a pond where lily pads floated like scattered thoughts, and beneath archways draped with honeysuckle that released its sweet perfume with every step. The sundial drew my attention for several long moments. Its bronze face was green with age, the Roman numerals barely visible beneath the patina, but the inscription around its base was still clear. Time is but the stream I go a-fishing in. The words seemed to capture something essential about this place, not time as an enemy to be conquered, but time as a companion to be enjoyed. If stories like this calm your thoughts, you're home here in Whispering Woods. The pond beside the sundial was perfect in its wildness. Water lilies floated serenely on its surface, their white blooms closed now for the evening, but still beautiful in their patient waiting for tomorrow's sun. Dragonflies skimmed the water with delicate precision, their wings catching the last light like stained glass. A family of ducks paddled quietly among the reeds, and somewhere in the distance, a frog began its evening song. I knelt beside the water's edge and dipped my fingers into the cool liquid. It was clear as crystal, and I could see small fish darting between the lily stems, their movements unhurried and graceful. The water seemed to carry the reflection not just of the sky above, but of something deeper, a sense of timelessness that made the everyday world feel very far away. It was then that I heard it more clearly, the sound of ticking, not the harsh mechanical tick of a modern clock, but something softer, more musical, like drops of water falling into a deep well. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, woven into the very air of the garden. I followed it as one follows a half-remembered melody, drawn forward by curiosity and a strange sense of recognition. The path continued deeper into the garden, winding past beds of herbs that released their fragrances as I brushed against them. Lavender and rosemary, sage and thyme, each plant adding its voice to the garden's symphony of scents. Old stone benches appeared at intervals, worn smooth by weather and time, positioned to catch the best views of the garden's changing landscapes. I paused at one of these benches, carved from what looked like a single piece of limestone, its surface warm from the day's sun, despite the approaching evening. From here, I could see the garden spread out in all directions, not planned and formal like the great estates I'd visited, but organic and flowing, as if it had grown according to its own secret wisdom rather than any human design. The ticking grew stronger as I continued along the path, accompanied now by other sounds, the gentle chiming of distant bells, the soft whir of gears turning, the delicate ping of springs unwinding. It was like walking toward the heart of some great clockwork mechanism, but one powered by magic rather than machinery. The path opened into a circular clearing where the source of the ticking revealed itself. In the center stood the most extraordinary structure I had ever seen, part greenhouse, part workshop, with windows of every shape and size, some clear, some colored, all catching and fracturing the dying light into thousands of tiny rainbows. The building seemed to have grown rather than been built, its walls curving organically, and its roof following the natural contours of the space beneath. Through the glass, I could see the silhouettes of countless clocks. Grandfather clocks tall as trees, delicate mantel clocks, cuckoo clocks with tiny doors, and timepieces so intricate they seemed like jewelry designed for giants. Some were clearly antiques, their cases dark with age and careful polishing. Others appeared newly made, their brasswork gleaming and their painted faces bright with fresh colors. All of them were ticking, but somehow their individual rhythms wove together into a harmonious whole. The door, painted a deep forest green and set with panels of stained glass, stood open as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. Above it, a sign read simply, Ezra Thorne, Clockmaker. The date beneath it was worn away, lost to time and weather, but the invitation felt eternal. Carved wooden wind chimes hung beside the door, their gentle music adding another layer to the garden's evening song. I stepped inside, and the world transformed. The workshop was larger inside than seemed possible, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with the most beautiful clockwork I had ever imagined. Some clocks were nearly finished, their faces painted with moons and stars and sailing ships. Others lay in various stages of creation, their gears and springs spread out like mechanical flowers waiting to bloom. The air hummed with the gentle breathing of hundreds of timepieces, each keeping its own rhythm, together creating a symphony of measured time. You're listening to Whispering Woods, where every night brings another quiet tale. The workshop was a wonderland of craftsmanship and imagination. Every surface held treasures, tiny brass gears no bigger than a fingernail, springs coiled like silver serpents, pendulums that caught the light as they swayed, tools hung from wooden pegs, each one worn smooth by countless hours of use. There were magnifying glasses mounted on articulated arms, oil lamps with colored glass shades, and drawings pinned to the walls, showing intricate mechanical designs that looked more like art than engineering. In one corner stood a case of completed clocks waiting for their new homes. A ship's chronometer in a brass case, its face marked with degrees and minutes. A bracket clock with a silvered dial that showed not just the hour, but the phases of the moon and the positions of the planets. A long case clock whose case was carved with vines and flowers so realistic they seemed to be growing from the wood itself. But it was the variety of timepieces that truly amazed me. There were clocks shaped like flowers that opened and closed their petals to mark the hours, others that looked like tiny theaters, with miniature figures that danced out the time. Some had faces made of mother of pearl that shimmered like captured moonlight, while others were crafted from dark wood inlaid with precious metals in patterns that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. And there, bent over a workbench near the back of the shop, was the clockmaker himself. Ezra Thorne looked to be somewhere between 60 and ageless, his hair silver white and his hands steady as they worked. He wore spectacles that caught the light from oil lamps placed throughout the workshop, and his fingers moved with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime coaxing magic from metal and wood. His clothing was simple but well made, a linen shirt the color of old parchment, a leather apron marked with the honest stains of his work, and a vest whose pockets seemed to hold an endless supply of tiny tools. He was working on a clock unlike any of the others. This one seemed to be made of moonlight and shadow, its hands moving not forward but in gentle spirals, as if time itself were dancing. The case appeared to be carved from a single piece of opalescent stone that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The face showed not numbers but phases of the moon, positions of stars, the subtle shifts of seasons rendered in delicate enamel work that must have taken months to complete. He said without looking up, "I've been expecting you." His voice had the quality of aged whiskey and winter evenings by the fire. There was no surprise in it, only a warm recognition, as if I were an old friend returning after a long journey. The words seemed to hang in the air among the gentle ticking of the clocks, becoming part of the workshop's ongoing conversation with time. "You have?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The question seemed to float in the air among the ticking of the clocks, and I found myself speaking more softly than usual, as if the workshop demanded a certain reverence. Time has a way of bringing the right people to the right places, Ezra said, finally looking up from his work. His eyes were the color of twilight, deep blue-gray with flecks of gold that seemed to move like captured starlight. There was kindness in those eyes, and a depth of understanding that suggested he had seen many souls find their way to his garden workshop. And you've been carrying such a heavy burden of time, haven't you? All those rushing hours, those urgent minutes, those sleepless nights when time feels like an enemy instead of a friend. I found myself nodding, though I hadn't realized how true his words were until he spoke them. In the gentle glow of the workshop, surrounded by the peaceful breathing of well-tended time, I felt something in my chest begin to unknot. It was as if he had named a wound. I didn't know I carried this constant battle with time, this feeling that there was never enough of it, that I was always falling behind in some race I hadn't agreed to run. "Sit," Ezra said, gesturing to a chair beside his workbench. "Let me show you something about time that most people have forgotten." The chair was positioned perfectly to catch the warm glow of an oil lamp whose shade was made of amber glass. It had been worn smooth by countless others who had sat here before me, and as I settled into its embrace, I felt a sense of belonging that surprised me. From where I sat, I could see out through one of the colored windows into the garden, where evening was settling like a soft blanket over the flowers. Fireflies were beginning to dance among the roses, their lights blinking in patterns that seemed almost like a secret language. If your eyes are growing heavy, that's how you know you're safe here, safe in Whispering Woods. "People think time is a river," Ezra said, returning to his work on the mysterious clock. His hands moved as he spoke, adjusting tiny gears with tools so delicate they seemed made for fairy work. Always flowing in one direction, carrying us along whether we like it or not. But that's not quite right. Time is more like a garden. It grows in all directions at once, and if you know how to tend it properly, it can bloom in the most unexpected ways. I watched his fingers dance across the clock's intricate mechanism. Each movement was deliberate and sure, the result of decades of practice. He picked up a gear no bigger than a snowflake and positioned it with the precision of a surgeon, then reached for a spring so fine it was almost invisible. His tools were extensions of his hands, each one chosen for its particular purpose and worn smooth by use. "This clock," he continued, "doesn't measure time the way you're used to. It measures moments. The space between heartbeats, the pause before a smile, the silence between notes in a lullaby. These are the treasures that most people rush past without noticing." The workshop around us seemed to pulse gently with the combined rhythms of all its timepieces. No two clocks kept exactly the same beat, but together they created something larger than themselves, a symphony of time that spoke not of urgency, but of patience, not of ending, but of continuance. I found my breathing beginning to match their gentle rhythm, my heartbeat slowing to join their peaceful chorus. As he worked, Ezra began to tell me about the clocks in his shop. Each one, he explained, was created for a specific purpose, a particular kind of time that needed tending. There was a clock for dreamers that only ticked during sleep, helping to weave pleasant visions through the hours of rest. Its case was made of wood from a tree that had stood for 300 years, and its face showed constellations instead of numbers, each star marking a different quality of dream. Another clock was designed for gardeners, its rhythm slowing during planting season and quickening during harvest, keeping perfect time with the earth's own needs. This one was housed in a case carved from driftwood and decorated with painted vines whose flowers seemed to bloom and fade as the seasons changed. Its pendulum was weighted with a small piece of stone from an ancient stone circle, connecting it to the deep rhythms of the earth itself. A third timepiece was crafted for lovers, designed to make every minute together feel like an hour, and every hour apart pass like a minute. Its case was inlaid with mother of pearl that caught and reflected light like captured moonbeams, and its face was painted with two figures who moved closer together as the hours passed, only to dance apart and come together again in endless, gentle cycles. There was a clock for musicians that kept time not in seconds, but in beats and measures, its rhythm shifting to match whatever music played nearby. Its case resonated like a small drum, and tiny bells marked the quarter hours with melodies that seemed to come from some celestial orchestra. Musicians who owned such clocks, Ezra explained, found that their practice sessions became meditation. Their performances gained a depth of feeling they had never achieved before. He showed me a clock designed for writers, its hands moving more slowly during moments of inspiration and faster during periods of struggle, teaching patience with the creative process. The case was made from paper pressed with flower petals and sealed with a resin that made it hard as wood but still translucent enough to let light pass through. Inside, instead of traditional weights, dried quill pens and ink bottles provided the power to keep the mechanism moving. But this one, he said, indicating the clock before him, this one is special. I've been working on it for, it must be 30 years now, maybe 40. Time moves differently when you're doing work you love. The clock was nearly complete. I could see now. Its case was carved from what looked like crystallized moonlight, a stone I had never seen before that seemed to hold captured starlight within its translucent depths. The face showed not numbers but phases of the moon, positions of the stars, the subtle shifts of seasons rendered in enamel work so fine it must have been painted with brushes made from single hairs. The hands moved in spirals as I had noticed before, but watching them now, I began to understand. They weren't marking time passing. They were marking time being savored, time being fully lived. Around the edge of the clock face, tiny figures appeared to be engaged in various activities. A woman tending flowers, a man reading by candlelight, children playing in a garden, an elderly couple sitting together watching the sunset. As the hands moved, the scenes seemed to shift and change, telling the story of a life lived in harmony with time's natural rhythms. "What does it do?" I asked, leaning closer to examine the intricate details. Ezra smiled, and in that smile I saw decades of patience, of work done with love, of time spent in the most meaningful way possible. It helps people remember what time is really for. Not for rushing or worrying or filling with busyness, but for growing, for loving, for becoming who you're meant to be. It reminds us that the best moments are not the ones that pass quickly, but the ones that expand, that fill us with peace and wonder. As he spoke, I felt something shifting inside me. The constant urgency that had driven me for so long began to quiet. In its place grew a sense of spaciousness, as if time itself were giving me permission to breathe, to rest, to simply be. The workshop around us seemed to expand, its walls becoming less solid, more like suggestions than boundaries. The oil lamps flickered gently, casting dancing shadows on the workshop walls. Each lamp had its own character, one with a shade of rose-colored glass that painted everything in warm pink light, another with blue glass that created pools of cool, calming illumination. The shadows they cast were not harsh but soft, like watercolor paintings that shifted and changed with each small movement of the flames. Outside, Night had fully arrived, but it felt like a comfortable darkness, the kind that invites rest rather than worry. The symphony of ticking clocks continued, but now it sounded less like the passing of time and more like a lullaby. Each tick a gentle note in an endless song of peace. Through the windows, I could see the garden transformed by moonlight, the white flowers glowing like stars fallen to earth. "How long have you been here?" I asked, settling deeper into the comfortable chair. Ezra chuckled, a sound like autumn leaves rustling. "That's the beautiful thing about doing work you love in a place that feels like home. Time stops being something you count and becomes something you inhabit. I've been here long enough to see the seasons turn hundreds of times, long enough to watch the garden grow from my grandmother's careful plantings into the wild beauty it is now, long enough to help countless people discover that time doesn't have to be an enemy." He set down his tools for a moment and turned to face me fully. His workbench was immaculate, despite the complexity of his current project. Every tool in its place, every gear and spring organized in small wooden boxes lined with velvet. There was something deeply peaceful about the order he maintained, not rigid or compulsive, but the natural organization of someone who had found perfect harmony between his work and his space. "Which brings me to why you're here," he continued. "You've been fighting time, haven't you? Trying to beat it, outrun it, make it bend to your will. But time isn't meant to be conquered. It's meant to be danced with." The truth of his words settled over me like a warm blanket. I had been fighting time, treating each day like a battle to be won rather than a gift to be unwrapped slowly. I had been so focused on getting through moments that I had forgotten to live in them. The realization was both painful and liberating painful, because it revealed how much life I had missed in my rushing. Liberating because it suggested that change was possible. "Would you like to see the garden at night?" Ezra asked, standing and stretching like a cat after a long nap. "It's quite magical in the moonlight. Before you drift off, remember to follow Whispering Woods for tomorrow's story." We left the workshop together, stepping out into air that smelled of night-blooming jasmine and the distant promise of rain. The garden had transformed in the darkness. What had been beautiful in daylight was now ethereal, otherworldly. Moonlight turned the white roses into glowing lanterns, and the fireflies had multiplied, creating a constellation at ground level that rivaled the stars above. The night air was soft against my skin, carrying scents that seemed to change with each breath. Now the green smell of dew forming on grass, now the honey sweetness of night-blooming cereus, now the earthy richness of soil that had been warmed all day by the sun and was now releasing its stored heat into the cooling air. Each breath felt like a small gift, a reminder that the simple act of breathing could be a meditation if approached with the right attention. We walked slowly along paths I hadn't noticed before, past a fountain where water fell in silver streams, its sound like liquid music in the quiet night. The fountain was carved from what looked like a single piece of marble, its basin deep enough to reflect the moon and stars. Water lilies floated on its surface, their blooms closed for the night, but their broad leaves creating patterns of shadow and silver on the water's surface. Around the fountain, benches were positioned to catch the sound of the water and the sight of the stars reflected in its depths. Night-blooming flowers had been planted nearby 4 o'clocks that opened as the sun set. Moonflowers whose white trumpets glowed like captured moonbeams, and evening primrose, whose pale yellow blooms seemed to emit their own gentle light. We continued past beds where night-blooming cereus opened its ghostly white flowers to the moon, their blooms so rare and brief that seeing them was considered a gift. The flowers were enormous, nearly a foot across, with petals like silk and a fragrance so delicate it seemed to be made of starlight itself. Each bloom would last only one night, opening as darkness fell and closing forever with the dawn, making this moment of seeing them feel precious beyond measure. The sound of the workshop's clocks faded behind us, replaced by the gentle music of night, the soft hoot of an owl calling from somewhere deep in the garden, the rustle of some small creature making its way through the undergrowth, the distant whisper of wind through leaves. Night sounds, but comforting ones, the kind that speak of a world at peace with itself. The garden teaches the same lesson as the clocks, Ezra said as we paused beside a bench carved from a single piece of driftwood, its surface worn smooth by countless seasons of weather. Everything has its season, its own perfect timing. The roses don't worry about blooming too late or too early. They simply bloom when they're ready, and their beauty is perfect because it's authentic. We sat on the bench, and I felt the last of my tension flowing away into the earth beneath my feet. The wood was still warm from the day's sun, and its surface had been worn into perfect smoothness by weather and time. From here, we had a view across the entire garden, its paths winding like silver ribbons in the moonlight, its various sections each creating their own small world of beauty and wonder. Above us, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, marking time on a scale so vast it made human worries seem beautifully small. The moon was nearly full, its light strong enough to read by, casting everything in silver and shadow. A gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of herbs and old roses, of earth after rain, and the green smell of growing things. I used to have a garden, I found myself saying, the words emerging from some deep place I hadn't accessed in years. A small one, just a few pots on my balcony. I loved it, but I got so busy I forgot to water it. Everything died. The admission felt like a confession, carrying with it the weight of all the things I had neglected in my rush through life. The garden had been more than just plants. It had been a connection to something larger than myself, a daily reminder of the cycles of growth and rest that governed all living things. Losing it had been like losing a part of myself I didn't know how to get back. Ezra nodded with understanding. Ah, but gardens are forgiving. They remember the love you gave them, even if it was interrupted. And new gardens can always be planted. I don't know if I have time for a garden anymore. Time? Ezra smiled, his eyes reflecting the moonlight like still water. My dear friend, you don't need to have time. You need to make time. And making time is simply a matter of choosing what deserves your attention. A garden doesn't need hours. It needs moments. A few minutes each morning to water and observe. A pause each evening to notice what's changed. Time given with attention is worth more than hours spent distracted. As we sat in the moonlit garden, surrounded by the patient beauty of growing things, I began to understand what he meant. Time wasn't the problem. My relationship with time was. I had been treating it like a finite resource to be hoarded, rather than a flowing abundance to be shared. I had been rushing through my days instead of walking through them with awareness and intention. The garden around us seemed to pulse gently with life. Night-blooming flowers opened their petals to catch the moonlight. Somewhere in the darkness, a night-blooming cereus was beginning its brief, spectacular bloom. Moths danced between the flowers, their wings catching the silver light as they went about their ancient work of pollination. Everything moved according to its own rhythm, unhurried and purposeful. A shooting star traced a silver line across the sky, and without thinking, I made a wish. Not for more time, but for the wisdom to use the time I had, in ways that would make my life bloom like the wild garden around me. Good wish, Ezra said quietly, and I realized he somehow knew what I had asked for. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fireflies weave their patterns among the flowers. Their lights seemed to pulse in response to some cosmic rhythm, creating patterns that were beautiful precisely because they were temporary. Each flash was a small celebration, a moment of pure light in the darkness, lasting just long enough to be noticed and appreciated before fading back into the night. The night air was soft and warm, filled with the promise of gentle dreams. In the distance, I could hear the faint chiming of one of Ezra's clocks marking another hour, but it sounded less like time passing and more like time celebrating, as if each hour were a small gift being unwrapped. The sound seemed to come from very far away, as if the workshop existed in a different dimension from the moonlit garden where we sat. Moths had begun to visit the night-blooming flowers, their wings catching the moonlight as they moved from bloom to bloom. They were beautiful creatures, their patterns subtle and intricate, designed not for day's bold displays, but for night's gentle mysteries. Watching them, I felt a kinship with their patient work, their willingness to labor in darkness for the sake of beauty and continuation. I should probably go, I said eventually, though part of me wanted to stay in this timeless place forever. The words felt strange in my mouth, a habit from the rushing world I had temporarily left behind. Should. Ezra raised an eyebrow, his expression gentle but questioning. That's a word worth examining. Do you want to go, or do you think you should go? I considered this. Really considered it, perhaps for the first time in years. So much of my life had been governed by shoulds, things I thought I was supposed to do, supposed to want, supposed to achieve. But what did I actually want in this moment? I think I should go because it's late, and I have work tomorrow, and I need to be responsible. And do you want to go? No, I admitted, the honesty surprising me with its clarity. I want to stay here in this peaceful place where time feels kind. Ezra stood, extending a hand to help me up. His palm was warm and calloused from years of careful work, grounding me in the present moment. Then let's find a compromise. You can take some of this peace with you. The garden will always be here when you need it. But more importantly, you now know the secret of making any place a garden. Which is 1. Attention, presence, choosing to notice the beauty that's already there. Every moment has the potential to bloom if you give it the right kind of care. We walked slowly back toward the workshop, but instead of going inside, Ezra led me to a small side gate I hadn't noticed before. It was made of the same iron as the main entrance, but smaller, more intimate. Beyond it lay a path that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, winding back toward the world I had temporarily left behind. The path was lined with lavender plants, whose fragrance would provide a gentle escort back to ordinary reality. Will I see you again? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Ezra smiled, his face kind in the moonlight. The garden is always here for those who need it. And now that you know the way, you'll find that many places can become gardens if you approach them with the right spirit. Your morning coffee can become a small ceremony of gratitude. Your evening walk can become a meditation on the day's gifts. Time doesn't have to be conquered. It can be celebrated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in soft cloth. For your balcony garden, he said, pressing it into my hands. A reminder that it's never too late to begin again. I unwrapped the cloth carefully, revealing a small cutting from one of the garden's roses. It was from the climbing rose that covered the sundial. I realized a variety so old it had no modern name. its petals white with edges touched by pink, its fragrance carrying the sweetness of centuries. The cutting had already begun to show tiny root buds, as if Ezra's garden had prepared it specifically for this moment. As I stepped through the gate, I turned back for one last look at the clockmaker's garden. Ezra was already walking back toward his workshop, but he raised a hand in farewell, his figure becoming part of the garden's shadows and moonlight. The workshop glowed warmly in the distance, its windows throwing colored light across the paths, and I could just hear the gentle symphony of its clocks keeping their patient time. The garden seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, as if it existed just slightly outside the normal world. A pocket of peace where time moved to its own gentle rhythm. As I watched, the night-blooming cereus I had seen earlier opened its spectacular flower, a bloom that would last only until dawn, but was no less beautiful for its brevity. In that moment, I understood something profound about the nature of beauty and time, that the most precious things are often the most temporary, and that their very transience makes them more precious, not less. The path back to Millfield Lane seemed shorter than the journey in, as if the garden had delivered me exactly where I needed to be. As I walked, I became aware of the rose cutting in my hand, its thorns softened by time and care, its potential for new growth carrying the promise of tomorrows filled with beauty. The path was lined with night-blooming flowers that seemed to glow in the darkness, creating a gentle corridor of light to guide my way. The lavender plants that bordered the path released their fragrance as I passed, each step releasing a small cloud of scent that would help me remember this magical night. By the time I reached the lane, my clothes carried the garden's perfume, roses, and jasmine, lavender, and the green smell of growing things. I would carry these scents with me back to the ordinary world, invisible reminders of the peace I had found in Ezra's timeless garden. When I reached my apartment, I placed the cutting in water and set it on my windowsill. Even in the artificial light of my kitchen, it seemed to carry some of the garden's magic with it. Its leaves a deep green that spoke of rich soil and patient care. I found myself moving more slowly as I prepared for bed, noticing the way the water sounded as it filled my glass, the texture of my sheets as I pulled them back, the way the moonlight painted patterns on my bedroom floor. For the first time in months, I didn't check the time before falling asleep. Instead, I listened to the sound of my own breathing, steady and calm, and let myself drift into dreams filled with the scent of roses and the gentle ticking of clocks that measured not the passing of time, but the accumulation of peace. I woke the next morning to find that the rose cutting had already begun to show tiny green shoots impossibly fast, perhaps, but the garden had taught me that time doesn't always follow the rules we think it must. As I watered it, I remembered Ezra's words about attention and presence, and I found myself really seeing my small balcony for the first time in years. There was potential here, space for new growth, corners that could hold pots of herbs, railings that could support climbing flowers. The morning light fell across the concrete in patterns I had never noticed before, creating microclimates where different plants might thrive. I could create my own version of the clockmaker's garden, a place where time moved gently and moments were allowed to bloom. That evening, instead of rushing through my walk home from work, I took the long way. I noticed things I had been too hurried to see before. The way late afternoon light fell across the brick buildings, the small garden someone had planted between two storefronts, the sound of children laughing in a nearby park. Each observation felt like a small gift, a moment expanded and honored. The children's laughter drew me to pause at the park's edge. There was something magical about watching them play the way they moved through time without urgency, completely absorbed in the present moment. A little girl was blowing dandelion seeds into the wind, making wishes with each breath. A boy was examining something small in his palm with the intense focus that only children bring to their discoveries. They were natural masters of what Ezra had tried to teach me, the art of inhabiting time rather than being driven by it. When I reached Millfield Lane, I looked for the gate to the Clockmaker's garden, but it wasn't there. Where the iron gate had stood, there was only a wall overgrown with ivy. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined the entire experience. But then I felt the weight of the rose cutting in my pocket, saw the faint stain of garden soil still under my fingernails. Some places, I realized, exist not in geography, but in the heart. The Clockmaker's garden was real, but it was also a metaphor, a teaching that had taken root inside me. I carried it with me, now, the knowledge that time could be a friend rather than an enemy, that moments could be savored rather than rushed through, that any place could become a garden with the right kind of attention. That night, I planted the rose, cutting in a small pot on my balcony. As I worked with the soil, feeling its texture between my fingers, breathing in the earth scent that reminded me of Ezra's garden, I heard it again, the gentle ticking that had first drawn me to the Clockmaker's workshop. But now I understood it wasn't coming from outside myself. It was the sound of my own heart, keeping its steady rhythm, marking not time passing, but time being lived. The soil was dark and rich, still warm from the day's sun, despite the evening coolness. As I settled the rose cutting into its new home, I felt a connection not just to the garden I had visited, but to all the gardens that had ever been, all the hands that had ever worked soil with love and hope. This simple act of planting felt like a prayer, a promise to myself to tend not just this small plant, but the garden of my own life with the same patience and attention. In the weeks that followed, my small balcony garden grew. I added herbs and small flowering plants, each one chosen not for efficiency, but for the joy it brought me. Basil that perfumed the evening air when I brushed against its leaves. Lavender, whose purple spikes attracted bees, and whose scent dried beautifully for sachets. Morning glories that climbed the balcony railing and opened fresh blue trumpets to greet each dawn. I began to notice how different plants had their own schedules, some opening their flowers to greet the morning sun, others saving their blooms for evening's cooler air. The morning glories taught me about anticipation and renewal, closing their flowers each afternoon, only to open fresh ones the next morning. The herbs showed me how beauty and utility could coexist, their flowers as lovely as their mare. Flavors were useful. I learned to water them, not according to a rigid schedule, but according to their needs, paying attention to the subtle signs they gave me. The way leaves would droop slightly when thirsty, the difference in soil color between moist and dry, the weight of pots that told stories about what was happening beneath the surface. This attention became a form of meditation, a daily practice of presence that grounded me in the moment. The rose cutting flourished, sending out new leaves and eventually, months later, producing its first bloom. It was white, with edges touched with pink, and its fragrance carried the memory of moonlight and magical places. When I breathed in its scent, I could almost hear the distant sound of Ezra's clocks, marking moments of beauty in their patient, eternal way. My relationship with time began to change as well. I found myself arriving at appointments not rushed and breathless, but calm and present. I discovered the art of being early, of building small cushions of time around activities so that I could move through my day with grace rather than urgency. These weren't large changes, leaving 5 minutes earlier for meetings, setting my alarm 10 minutes sooner to allow for a peaceful morning routine, but their cumulative effect was profound. I learned to say no to commitments that felt driven by obligation rather than joy, making space for the things that truly mattered. A book club that met to discuss novels that spoke to the soul rather than the bestsellers everyone felt they should read. Weekend mornings spent in farmers' markets, moving slowly among the stalls and choosing ingredients for meals I would cook with attention rather than efficiency. Evening walks that had no destination except wherever my feet wanted to carry me. Most importantly, I learned to notice moments of beauty as they happened. The way steam rose from my morning coffee, the patterns sunlight made on my desk, the sound of rain beginning against the windows. These observations didn't take extra time. They simply required me to be present for the time I was already living. It was like adjusting the focus on a camera, the same scene, but suddenly clear and vivid instead of blurred and overlooked. Sometimes, on walks through the city, I would catch a glimpse of green through an unexpected gate. Hear the sound of water flowing over stone from a hidden courtyard. Notice the scent of roses carried on the evening air. These moments reminded me that magic wasn't confined to one mysterious garden. It was everywhere, waiting to be discovered by those who knew how to look. A small cafe I had passed hundreds of times revealed itself to have a tiny garden courtyard visible through its back window. An alley I had dismissed as purely functional turned out to be lined with climbing vines that bloomed spectacularly in spring. The city library had a reading room with tall windows that caught the afternoon light in patterns that changed with the seasons, creating a natural clock that marked time and beauty rather than urgency. And sometimes, late at night, when sleep was slow to come, I would think about Ezra in his workshop, surrounded by the gentle breathing of his clocks, creating timepieces that measured not the minutes we're losing, but the moments we're gaining. I would imagine him bent over his workbench, crafting new kinds of time for new kinds of dreams, teaching through his patient work that the best way to honor time is to use it for what we love. The image of him working by lamplight became a meditation for me. When I felt the old urgency rising, when the world's demands seemed to press in on all sides, I would picture his steady hands adjusting tiny gears, his face peaceful in concentration, his work unhurried despite being eternal. The thought of him reminded me that some things cannot be rushed, that the most beautiful creations emerge from patience and love rather than pressure and speed. Sound of ticking would fade then into the rhythm of my own breathing, and I would fall asleep knowing that somewhere in the space between heartbeats, in the pause before dreams, time was unfolding exactly as it should, carrying me gently toward another day of possibilities, another chance to tend the garden of moments that was my one precious life. The clock on my nightstand would tick quietly through the night, but it no longer sounded like time passing. It sounded like time arriving, each second a small gift, each minute a new chance to practice the art of being present, each hour an opportunity to remember that we don't have to rush toward the future, because the present moment, attended to with love, contains everything we need. My apartment began to reflect this new relationship with time. I replaced the harsh overhead lights with table lamps that created pools of warm illumination. I moved my furniture to catch the best natural light at different times of day, creating reading corners for morning coffee and evening reflection. Small changes, but they transformed my living space from a place I rushed through into a place I could inhabit with pleasure. I started keeping a journal, not of tasks completed or goals achieved, but of moments noticed. The way frost formed patterns on my windows in winter, the sound of the first thunderstorm of spring, the sight of the moon rising full and orange over the city skyline. Reading these entries weeks or months later, I was amazed by how much beauty I had been missing in my previous rush through life. The journal became a record of my growing friendship with time. I wrote about mornings when I woke naturally instead of to an alarm, and how different those days felt from their very beginning. I documented the pleasure of cooking a meal without watching the clock, of reading a book without calculating how many pages per minute I was managing, of taking a bath simply because the warm water felt good, rather than because it was an efficient way to get clean. And in the morning, when sunlight would touch the rose on my balcony, when the day would begin with all its usual demands and distractions, I would remember the Clockmaker's garden and know that no matter how busy the world became, I carried within me a place where time moved gently, where moments bloomed like flowers, and where the simple act of paying attention could transform any ordinary day into something magical. The rose continues to bloom, marking its own seasons, keeping its own time. From that single cutting, I now have several plants, each one carrying the genetics of Ezra's garden into new soil, new light, new possibilities. I share cuttings with friends who admire the flowers, and with each sharing, I pass along something of what I learned. That magical night, that time is not our enemy but our companion, not something to be conquered but something to be danced with. And I continue to learn from it, this small teacher that reminds me daily that the best things in life, growth, beauty, love, peace, cannot be rushed. They unfold in their own perfect timing, requiring only our patient attention and care. The rose's rhythm has become part of my own, its cycles of growth and rest teaching me that productivity and rest are not opposites, but partners in the dance of a life well lived. Sometimes I wonder if I will ever find the gate to the Clockmaker's garden again, if I will ever sit once more with Ezra among his chorus of gentle timepieces. But then I look at my balcony garden, listen to the steady rhythm of my heart, feel the peace that has taken root in my life since that magical evening, and I realize I don't need to find the garden again. The garden has found me. It lives now in every moment I choose to savor rather than rush through, in every pause I take to notice beauty, in every breath I draw with gratitude rather than anxiety. The Clockmaker's gift wasn't just a lesson about time, it was a transformation of how I inhabit each moment of my life. Friends have begun to notice the change in me. They comment on my calmness, ask about the secret to my newfound peace. Some think I've started meditating, others assume I've found religion. In a way, both are true. I have found a spiritual practice, but it's not formal meditation or organized faith. It's the simple practice of being present, of treating each moment as sacred, of remembering that time is not something that happens to us, but something we participate in creating. I've started sharing Ezra's wisdom with others, not through preaching, but through example. When friends complain about not having enough time, I listen with compassion, but also with the knowledge that their relationship with time, like mine once was, might need tending. I invite them to my balcony garden, let them experience the peace of watering plants and watching things grow at their own pace. Some understand immediately, drawn to the garden's gentle rhythm like bees to flowers. Others need more time, more examples, more patient demonstrations that a different way of living is possible. I've learned not to rush their understanding, that too would be working against time's natural flow rather than with it. The seasonal changes in my garden have become markers not just of time passing, but of time deepening. Each spring brings new growth that builds on the foundation of previous seasons. Each summer offers abundance that feels earned through patient tending. Each fall provides harvest and the satisfaction of seeds saved for future plantings. Each winter brings rest and the deep peace of dormancy, reminding me that doing nothing is sometimes the most important work of all. And as I settle into sleep tonight, listening to the gentle sounds of the night, feeling the soft weight of blankets, breathing in air that carries the faint scent of roses from my balcony, I know that tomorrow will bring another day of moments to tend, another chance to practice the art of living in time rather than being driven by it. The ticking fades into silence, the silence deepens into peace, and somewhere in that perfect stillness, time transforms from an enemy into a friend, from a river rushing past into a garden where everything blooms in its own perfect season, where every moment is a flower waiting to unfold, where the art of being present is the only clock that truly matters. Sleep comes like gentle rain on a summer garden, watering dreams that grow in the timeless space of rest, nurturing the soul for another day of moments, another chance to live fully in the gift of time that never stops giving, if only we learn to receive it with open hands and grateful hearts. In dreams, I sometimes return to Ezra's workshop, finding it exactly as I left it but somehow changed, reflecting my own growth and understanding. New clocks have appeared on the workbench's timepieces I recognize as representing the different aspects of my transformed life. There's one for gardeners that ticks in rhythm with growing things, another for those who have learned to arrive early and move through their days with grace. And always, in the center of the workshop, Ezra continues his work on that mysterious clock, the one that measures moments instead of minutes, the one that reminds us what time is really for. In my dreams, I can see that it's nearly finished now, its mechanism complete, its face glowing with an inner light that speaks of time perfected, time transformed from taskmaster into teacher. When I wake from these dreams, I carry their peace with me into the new day, knowing that somewhere, in the space between sleeping and waking, between one breath and the next, the clockmaker's garden continues to grow, continues to teach, continues to offer its timeless wisdom to anyone patient enough to listen. And the rose on my balcony continues to bloom, each flower a small miracle, each moment of its opening a reminder that the most beautiful things in life cannot be hurried, only loved into being through patience, attention, and the gentle understanding that time, when befriended rather than fought, becomes the greatest gift of all.